Hi, everyone. Thank you for checking out this week's episode. I wanted to jump on and offer a small reminder of the ways that you can connect with us. The first way is our socials. So we are Men I've Tolerated Pod on Instagram and Natalie K124 on TikTok, my personal Instagram. And you can find us on YouTube and Pinterest under To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. The second way is by becoming a Patreon member. We are well on our way to our 25 member Patreon, where we are going to unlock bonus perks to being a patron member. Shout out to all of our existing patrons. As an independently ran and funded podcast, your support means everything. Another way that you can connect with us is making sure to subscribe and leave comments wherever you can so we can start reading reviews on each podcast episode. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure to check out the merch store, and we will see you next week. Hey, tolerators. This is To All the Men I've Tolerated Before with Natalie Katona, your weekly look at everyday misogyny. Today, my guest is Amy Green-Smith, host of the Bold-Faced Truth podcast. Amy is a life coach and hypnotherapist. I'm going to stumble over that. Syllables. Are you kidding? Her podcast is where she brings listeners together to talk shit about the things that matter. Today, she will be helping me dive into the different fear types and how they perpetuate the misogynistic cycles we live in. Thanks for being here, Amy.
Hi, Nat. I'm excited to connect and talk about this stuff. I could talk about it all day.
I'm excited. I'm excited that your entire show is based around talking shit. I love talking shit.
Well, it really is around talking about the stuff that we avoid all the time, and that's why I called it the bold-faced truth. Is I feel like we tell bold-faced lies all the time, and we're people pleasing. And so what's the opposite of that? Bold-faced truth. Like, what would life be like if we were all speaking up for ourselves constantly?
Yeah, I get that because I've been stretching out my comedy skills recently, and I realized that the majority of the time that people laugh at me, it's literally just because I've told them something that I thought, like, hey, that's a red flag. And they think I'm joking. I'm like, no, you're literally full of red flags. I'm just like counting them as we sit here.
Yes, exactly. I love it. I love that you do that.
So tell me more about these 4 fear responses that we live with.
Sure. So this could be a full on like little TED talk. So you just interrupt the fuck out of me if you need to. So we've all heard fight flight, right? We've all heard of that. And we've also talked about freeze, and then there's sort of this newer one on the block called fawn, a fawning response. So if we think about all 4 of these from a primitive lens, let's say it is our ancestors and they are trying to survive and they are running from some sort of wildlife, from a mountain lion. If you were to fight, you would obviously try to fight the mountain lion. If you were to flee, you would run away. If you were to freeze, you would obviously hold still. If you were to fawn, you are placating. You are saying, like, here, kitty, 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 do you want a little treat? Why don't you go over here? Right? Like, so the idea behind fawning is that you would be placating or acquiescing to an aggressor or a captor or some sort of type of threat, right? Well, hopefully all of y'all listening aren't necessarily running from wildlife all the time.
Mountain lions, cocaine bear.
Right. Hopefully you don't have to have a run-in with cocaine bear. But all 4 of these fear responses have adapted and iterated themselves into modern life. So there are reasons why we're feeling such incredible anxiety, depression, etc., because they are evolutionary. They are iterations of our primitive fear responses. So, fight has now sort of evolved into what we experience as anxiety. So,
Mm.
if we're in a situation where we feel a sense of fear, threat, or stress, that kicks in our defense mechanism and we go, okay, how do I stay safe in this situation? Can I fight? If you can't fight, oftentimes it will send in a huge surge of anxiety. And so it's an energy and it's telling you there's something awry here that I don't feel totally safe with, right?
I was talking recently about it was on our Patreon episode with our good friend Annie Sieg, who's on here from time to time. And we were just talking about our generalized red flags. And we were talking about how ours is like the need to feel like we're always right. And I was like, oh, I'll fight to the death to be like, I didn't do anything wrong. I did not do anything wrong because of the anxiety that comes from doing something wrong. So I spend a lot, or I used to, therapy, everybody, but I used to spend so much emotional mental load, like pre scripting out arguments in my head. Like, oh, this person's going to hate me. So it's fine. I have like all of these receipts that make them a bad person, and I'll just be ready to quip them out if I need them. So I think it's so interesting how we've now started to categorize fight as more of a like feeling verbal component than literally like throwing hands.
That's exactly right. So essentially that fight is internal now. And so it creates sometimes very physiological responses where we have like the sweaty palms or the rapid heartbeat, or for me anxiety showed up as extreme worry. So it would just be sort of like this mental loop, and part of it was sort of an addiction to the relief. So as soon as there was a relief, or maybe in your situation, as soon as that person walks away or the situation's done, then you can be like, okay, cool. I took care of myself. I took care of myself. I fought the mountain lion, right? And I do think that it's different for different folks. I think there's a difference between a feeling of anxiety that's situational versus something that is that you've struggled with your entire life. And I think that needs to be treated by the appropriate practitioners. But one of the things that my friend and colleague Britt Frank talks about, and she speaks a lot about anxiety. She talks about how anxiety is genuinely just messaging. And that's how I feel about pretty much all emotion. If you're feeling a sense of guilt, overwhelm, stress, excitement, euphoria, bliss, whatever it happens to be, all of those things that we experience as humans, it is simply just messaging. It's just there to be like, bitch, I need you to pay attention. But we don't do that with anxiety. We go, holy shit, I got to get rid of this. Why am I feeling this way? We want to run. We're like, get me out of here. Instead of going, is being around this person a red flag or a pink flag? Is being around that's the baby red flag, right? That so or being around this situation or working in this environment or having to have this specific skill set or do these different things, we have to examine that anxiety to go, am I actually in fucking danger, or is this just new? Because a lot of times we will experience a fear response when something is just straight up new. It's not necessarily that danger is afoot, whether it be physical or emotional. We're just, we think that it's, I need to prepare, I need to fight, I need to flee. What we have to do is examine the situation and go, wait a minute, where is this fear coming from? What am I making up about this? What is the messaging, so that we can properly handle it, right? Because if it's something that is more like a chemical issue that you need rectified with medication, that's one thing. Or if it's, I haven't moved, I haven't physically moved my body in 2 weeks, I need to go and like get this out of my body. There's so many different remedies, but if we don't examine what actually caused this, then we just keep going, what's wrong with me? And I'm trying to run away from this symptom instead of seeing what the root cause is.
When I was a teacher, I saw this played out not so much with fear, but with children and anger, where that they had already internalized that their anger was a negative quality and therefore was constantly going to get in trouble. And if I was an adult in the room and they were getting angry, they knew that I was the person who was about to like deal out a punishment. And it would floor kids when I would just look at them and go, "So, what is this about today?" And they're like, "Well, I have anger issues. Haven't you heard?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah. Okay." I was like, "We all saw Inside Out. All of the feelings matter and they all get to have a turn at the control board. If anger is yours today, we can get through it." And I feel like school is one of those places where like fear, anger, even sometimes sadness, because it's not a really great place in the curriculum map for a kid to have a meltdown all of a sudden, they get demonized.
Sure. Because emotions are fucking inconvenient. They're fucking inconvenient. And if you as a teacher are dealing with somebody's meltdown, even though it's totally valid and there's lots of messaging there, our society goes, "You're inconvenient for me. You're not keeping up with capitalism, with the patriarchy, with production. Shut that shit down unless you're making money."
Now we have this new fear response. I call it silent anger that I see amongst some of my friends who have partners where all of a sudden like everything's fine until the misogynist in the room has felt a thing and now he's silently seething at us. And I'm like, that's a red flag. Silent anger is scarier to me than if he had just told us, "I need to walk away from you assholes," and walked away, because that's more coping than just sitting there thinking of all of the way. Because when I see it happen, my fear response is to go, "Oh, he's thinking of all of the ways to like remove us from the path, like the planet, because he's feeling shame."
Yes. There's a great conversation that Brene was having around a lot of the social justice stuff that was happening around the time of George Floyd's murder. And she was talking about how there's a difference between being shamed, and feeling shame. And this is such a perfect example. So, what I would say to that individual, no matter who they are, is that is a indication of emotional immaturity. Either way, whether they went fight and stormed off and got really loud and combative, or they just silently didn't do anything and just stewed, or completely froze and didn't know what to do, or fawning has been sort of the modern iteration of that is people pleasing, right? So no matter what that person is embodying, if they are not able to understand what's happening for them emotionally. And we do a massive disservice to those who identify as male in our culture because we essentially tell them, shut off an entire part of who you are as soon as you hit like 12 years old. Then zero feminine qualities. We don't want to see any of that bullshit. So, for a lot of men who are really incredibly deep feelers, they've been given zero resources on not only zero resources on how to use it, but then an extreme amount of demonizing if they don't quote be a man, right? So we've got all these. We do it to women too. We do it to everybody. We send all these mixed messages. But I think emotional intelligence. This is all about. The same concept of whether it's anger, whether it's guilt, what you were talking about earlier, like feeling a sense of guilt, that is a message and we have to unpack it and recognize, is this really the appropriate label? Like with guilt for example, a lot of times we will say things like I feel guilty or I feel bad when we've done nothing wrong, when we've done nothing wrong according to us, according to our own moral compass. So I have a very, very different belief system than my mom, for example. So if I speak up and say something that's really true for me in a really kind, loving way, but it's in direct opposition to what she believes, she's going to not agree with me, right? But that doesn't mean I need to feel bad or quote guilty What I'm feeling, a more suitable moniker or label would be I feel uncomfortable. I feel compassion. I feel concern. I feel obligated. I feel love. I feel empathy. I've been in situations like that where she's been in, like, my goodness, that's so difficult. So let's stop taking on the things that are not ours to take on, right? But all of this comes down to emotional intelligence. I mean, it really does.
No, that's really helpful because when I am faced with a parent or an adult figure in my life who is going off the rails about anything and everything that I find to be just like a human right, we'll throw out healthcare. What's the term I'm looking for? Universal healthcare. And people want to look at me and then tell me my fear response is to just get so fucking confused that a person who I love doesn't believe that everyone deserves medicine. And I'm like, how is it that I'm the person who is like, well, no, I just think that if everyone gets COVID, everyone gets COVID medicine. I don't understand. And so that's my favorite response is to just truly get really confused and then try to grapple with like how that could be. Like it's a control thing where it's like, okay, well, let's take all of the list of reasons why this person might feel that way. And I find a lot of people, myself included, doing that in relationships where it's like you still have to convince yourself, like, even if they're mistreating me, or even if they believe things that I think are off the wall, or even if I'm getting abused, cheated on, or all of it. Now, my fair response is to be like, but this person gets to be in my life. And here are all of the reasons why. And here are all of the reasons why this person might be mistreating me. And it's so much energy. It's so much, and so much text messaging to other people in all caps. Like, this is what they said today.
Right, right. So one of the things that I talk about all the time is how a lot of times we will speak up, but we speak up to the wrong person. So we're super pissed about something that our mom said, but we don't say something to her. We actually go tell our best friend. And that is one of the best places to excavate for boundaries that might need to be established is there anything that I've been chronically and consistently complaining about that I have not addressed with the actual people involved, right? When I'm not getting that sense from you. But that is something that I think everybody needs to check themselves on because there's this rampant diagnostic tool out there right now of saying, oh, you're toxic and you're toxic and you're a narcissist and you're a narcissist and you have this. And it's like, are they, or have you just labeled them that and run the fuck away with a flight response, right? Let me just fucking run away and then I can just label you as toxic, not address any of the stuff that I really need to address, and then just make myself a perpetual victim and you the perpetual villain. And then I don't have to grow at all. So it's something to be aware of. It doesn't mean that they aren't behaving poorly or that there isn't stuff that they need to own or acknowledge. But if you have not even given them the opportunity to be what you need, that is on you. So, one of the other ways that, kind of what you're talking about with these various relationships, this is huge for the fawn response. So, and this is the one that I think is really, really important because it has so much nuance. The modern iteration of the fawn response is people pleasing, is making sure that everybody else is okay so that I can be okay. So remember, if we're trying to placate that mountain lion going, here, kitty, 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 we're doing the exact same thing now with fucking Audrey in accounting because we're afraid that she's going to write us up if we don't get our report in at the right time, right? So we placate and we people please to self-preserve. The reason why I think people pleasing is so incredibly important to unpack here is it also gets demonized when sometimes it is actually what will keep you safe. So, if we're talking about partnerships where there is severe abuse, domestic violence, even emotional and verbal abuse, the way that I encourage people to communicate in those relationships are very, very different because we are, a lot of times in those situations, you are actually in danger. So calling forth any of these responses makes a shit ton of sense because you're just trying to take care of yourself. So it could be the best tool to placate and walk on eggshells so that somebody doesn't physically harm you, right? So the example I use is I identify as queer. Obviously, I feel very, very strongly about speaking up and having a voice and being open and honest about that stuff. However, if I'm in a situation where it's clearly not queer friendly and I could physically get hurt, that's probably not the time for me to get up on my soapbox and go off about trans rights, right? My efforts could probably be utilized in other ways more powerfully. So I think it's important that we recognize that it's not that people pleasing is always bad. We have to look for the nuance. I would say a majority of the time, however, we're not actually in danger. We simply just need to learn that we will survive speaking up for ourselves. You know, we will survive if somebody doesn't like us. And
Oh,
it,
put that on a t-shirt.
but it doesn't feel like that.
No. And we've been made to not feel like that. I think of all of the ways that we've been made to feel like our survival is directly connected to how we're making the other people in the room feel. Like
Yes.
performance reviews at jobs, where it's one person's perspective on the work that you're doing and you're being put on trial. And all of a sudden it's like, well, if you really think that my work sucks, now that's the way that I get food or I pay rent or whatever. So
Yes.
now I have changed my behavior before in jobs just to meet a toxic employer's like ego needs. Like, okay, I will fawn
Yes.
to your ego.
Mhm.
I will be quiet when you need me to be quiet. I will be a workhorse when you need me to be a workhorse. And if someone points out that I'm being a little good workhorse and I'm working very hard, I will make sure to direct that all to you, my everyday inspiration.
Right. Because here's the deal. Women, those who identify as women or femme presenting, especially if you have other marginalized identities, you have been the ones fighting the goddamn fights. It's been the queer individuals, it's been the black and brown folks, it's been the indigenous population, it's been the those with disabilities. They are the ones out there paving the fucking way. So if there are times when you have to tap out as like the beacon of truth to self preserve, fucking do it. Right? And but let's also not get it twisted about what we're doing. So, can we all be an Aaron Brockovich? Sure. Is there a cost to that? Absolutely. And that we don't all have to be the hero. What we do need to do though is analyze each of those situations. So for you, what you just shared, that was a very specific choice. I'm going to curb my behavior for me, in service of me, to make my job easier, to fly under the radar, to not get in trouble. That is very different than I need to placate and please this person so that they approve of me, so that they think I'm enough, so that I can believe that I'm enough. No, no, no. Those are two very different motivators, right? One is self preservation, and one is I need you to like me in order to be valuable.
That makes me feel so much better because when you're in a moment of self preserving and you're curbing your behavior to match some egotistical man, it makes you feel like you're playing right into the patriarchy's hand. Like, well, I guess I'll go get my poodle skirt and my milkshake and I will just be a good little housewife of the office because, like, that's how I felt the entire time. Like, ugh, I'm just losing the game when I'm actually playing the game. And I think when it comes to things like, we have so many things that are like trendy to be wrong right now, like not sticking up for yourself in a workplace or fast fashion comes to mind. And I see all of these other perspectives when it's like, sure, fast fashion is bad and it's destroying our environment, but we also don't pay people enough to have sustainable clothing. So sustainable clothing costs sometimes triple of what fast fashion would be. And it's really great that you have the privilege to care about that. I have to take my ass down to Walmart. That's what I can afford.
That's right. And so there are what's so important for us to look at is that there is nuance, that there it can't be fuck fear at all costs. It's like, no, sometimes fear is there so that we don't hurt ourselves. In fact, I believe that there is only one documented case of a woman who did not possess a fear response, and it was unbelievably dangerous. If I can find it, I'll send it over to you. It was chronicled on an NPR broadcast, and she would just fucking walk into the street. Like, there was no sense of any type of danger. And that's such a small example, but where she had to really learn, like, that's not safe, and what that really meant when she had zero emotional response to it. So the tricky thing about fear is it's going to show up when you're onto something, when it's like, yes, this is a new business adventure, and it'll show up when it's abort mission, get the fuck out of there. And so that's where discernment happens. That's where our personal development happens, where we don't put a blanket statement of like, people pleasing is always bad, perfectionism is always bad, onto something that it's going to change each time. And that's why we have to have the scruples to analyze what's happening in this situation for Natalie, what's happening in this situation right now for Amy. What is this fear really about? What is my gut telling me, right? So all of this stuff is incredibly important to analyze. I think, especially in personal development, we want a one size fits all answer for every situation. Like, okay, tell me what you always do in communication and boundaries. Tell me what you always do as far as self love. Tell me what you always do as far as perfectionism. And that's not the case. I oftentimes will say it's called personal development for a reason, because it's fucking personal. And you have to work with it, and you have to look for those elements of nuance. But I would love to talk to you just briefly about the fight response and the freeze response and those modern iterations too.
Oh, please do.
So we've got fight is kind of morphed into anxiety, fawn has morphed into people pleasing, and then we also have flight has now morphed into depression.
Mm.
So if you think about folks who do have a severe amount of depression, most of the time, what are we doing? We're running away. We want to go to sleep. We want to flee. Let me just sleep forever. Let me zone out forever. Let me just completely check out and run away. Now, very similarly to that, freeze, I would say these two are quite close. The modern iteration of freeze is procrastination.
I was going to guess that
Oh,
because
yeah.
I do it.
Well, if you think about it, I think that there are many reasons why we procrastinate. I don't think it's always directly related to fear. Sometimes I think it's just we procrastinate because labor is involved and labor is exhausting, whether it's physical or emotional or anything. We're just like, ugh, but we're not necessarily scared of something. It's not a fear. So, but hello, perfectionists out there or recovering perfectionists have a very, very close connection with procrastination. Why? Because we put shit off until it's flawless, and then that never happens. That never arrives. So I'm sure you've heard the quote, like, done is better than perfect. Like, just get something out. And you're a Capricorn, right?
I am in a
Yeah.
Libra rising. It's a fucked up combo.
I'm a Taurus, and so I'm very similar with Capricorn in the control and the order, and I want to know exactly how everything goes, and really it has to be flawless, and I have to really step away and go like, let go. Just done is better than perfect. Done is better. Perfect doesn't even exist. It doesn't really even exist. So, those are things to think about if you start to find yourself not taking action on something. If you are procrastinating, examine it for some fear. Am I afraid? Like, let's say you're starting a new business venture, or you want to get back into the dating scene, or you want to go back to school, and you find yourself dragging your feet on filling out that application or da, 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 and you know that it's something you really want. That's a key. Okay. That's incredibly important, because sometimes we drag our feet because there's a red fucking flag saying don't do it. Right. So as long as it's something that you really genuinely want and you're like, why can't I get out of my own way? Examine it for fear. Am I afraid? Am I making up that something is going to happen because of this thing that I want to go after? And then we have something to work with. Otherwise, we just are like, what's wrong with me? Blah, blah, blah. And we all know how well that works.
No, it has always been one of my fear responses because, you know, imposter syndrome is a lovely little partnership to our relationship to fear. And it'll just like, you'll be sitting there and it'll be like, for example, I'm taking a comedy writing class and it's like, sit down and write your 5 jokes, Natalie. And it's like, oh, I'm not feeling funny today. Well, you got to write 5 a day, Natalie. Ooh, but my soul just feels like unfunny. And you're just like pushing it off and pushing it off. And I remember the first time that I made my teacher laugh, and then I just texted a bunch of people like, I don't have to change my entire personality. It turns out that I am funny. Like, y'all, we get to believe it now. One guy told me.
And it was a guy, so we know.
Right. And it was like a teacher figure. So like it's someone working in comedy. Cuz isn't that always the thing? Is like we're always looking to these authority figures who probably didn't even want to be authority figures in our lives to be all like, I'm good, right? Me? Good or am I bad? And I'll just go away if I'm bad.
Well, and this is also, I'm so glad that you brought this up because I think this is also a social hierarchy that we see. And I know you talk a lot about it from like the male female perspective, but we see this sense of the people pleasing element, or let's keep these groups of folks in fear so we can keep them oppressed. So if we look at even how women historically have been pitted against one another, right? The poor population, no matter what color you are, has been pitted against one another instead of fighting the real opposition, right? If we can infight, if we can keep women hating each other and slut shaming or body shaming each other or parent shaming, all of that, then they won't see that they actually need to be in fucking power instead of all of these men or share power, right? So I think it's an important aspect to look at.
No, it's always fascinating to me to watch intergroup conflict and how that plays a part into what are we seeing in the news currently? What are we seeing in the media? Who aren't we seeing in the media and um in the news? Who's being denied rights right in front of us? And we're like, right now it's it's very interesting looking at how everyone is going to respond to drag bans and the trans community quickly and frighteningly so losing rights. And they know that if they uplift just a small group of privileged people within the LGBTQAI plus community, while also just like underhandedly like taking like first it starts with drag, then it's gender affirming care, then it's gay marriage, then it's interracial marriage, then it's arranged marriages sanctioned by some dude who believes he knows better, then it's one man can have 5 wives because it's helpful to him or what, and it just spirals.
Meanwhile, what we're supposed to be worried about is that if we let gay people marry, then now you're going to want to marry your car and you're going to want to marry. And I'm like, it, it, but it hasn't escalated though. Like
Right.
that wasn't the thing.
Also, I grew up in 90s and early 2000s TLC. They had an entire show dedicated to people who like wanted to marry a wall in Ireland, and
Yeah,
those people were doing okay, and it's none of our business.
exactly. Exactly. Well, I could certainly go off on a tangent here, but I think it's important to recognize the inflicted societal fears that we have. So, for example, a huge one that is a product of misogynistic culture is how much fear we have with our bodies as women. we go, oh my gosh, fat phobia is I cannot have a body like X, Y, or Z, because that means I'm not accepted to the society and the culture. But this is not anything new. Like, if we think about even Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, one of our primitive human needs is for a sense of belonging. Like, we are wired for connection. We need to belong to a group in order to survive. And that stems from our ancestors, where that was really quite true. Like, you couldn't just be some solo person out there in the wilderness. Like, you would die. You needed a group. So we still have those fear elements present, but they're showing up in a different way of now I'm afraid of what if I'm in this size of a body? Or what if I'm this age and I'm not partnered, right? Like, because historically, men gave us our worth. And if you weren't married, then what good are you if you're not property? And so we still see a lot of old remnants of that being really the case, and we're seeing a little going backwards a bit too.
Oh, well, I love to remind people through the show and through just conversations that we were raised by women who were either the women who couldn't own property or were raised by women who couldn't own property. Like, it's not like I'm closer to that than I am to that stupid little Kevin Bacon game that we play with. Like, we like to think of things in like hundreds of years, and it's like women haven't even had the right to vote for 200 years.
Yes. I mean, I'll be 44 next month. My mom couldn't buy a house without my dad. She couldn't get a credit card without my dad. And, like there's that's in my lifetime.
Hmm.
That's like when I was born. My mom needed him to take care. It's absolutely mind-blowing, and it's even worse in communities of color. It's dramatically worse. So, yeah, I can get really worked up with that. But okay, let's talk about then what the fuck do we do about this, right?
That's one of my
Because
questions.
because we can complain all day, and that does feel really good. Like I was mentioning earlier, if we get to be the victim and blame, then we get to just kind of sit here and be pissed. But what are the actions, right? Is it to say, "Oh no, I'm not oppressed," or "Oh no, I'm not having evoking this fear response all the time"? No, that's true. And what do we need? What is within my power? And my perspective is one of there's our task at hand that's nuclear and that is personal. And then there's the task at hand that is communal and societal. So when we are dealing with our own fear, our own oppression, our own opposition, our own stress, the only option we have is to call upon ourselves. Like that, no matter who you are, no matter what your situation is. Does it mean that everything is surmountable? Yes. Does it mean that that's easy? Fuck no. And so it's sort of like if you've ever seen that illustration of two people that are about to run on a racetrack. And there's this man on one side, and he has no obstacles in front of him. And then you see a woman of color on the right side, and in front of her are all these fucking obstacles. So, culturally, what we have to do, societally, what we have to do is use our voices and use our vote and use our influence to get out there and remove those fucking obstacles, right? As a community, we need to remove those. As that woman and that individual, all she has in that moment, no matter how unfair it is to call upon her own internal power and her own internal strength. So, as unfair as that is, that we don't have a system that supports us, I still feel like it is a fucking act of resistance to say, I matter, my voice matters, you are going to hear me, I am going to speak up, I am going to take up space, both emotionally and fucking physically. And that right there is what is going to change our culture and change our ability. So, even if you are like, gosh, I don't like myself, or I feel like I'm such an imposter, hear me when I tell you, loving yourself and cultivating that relationship with yourself is the fiercest act of resistance that you can utilize.
Hell yeah. One of the most recent fear responses I've seen, I have Eras tour tickets for Taylor Swift, so that's the only thing that's popping up on my feed
Oh,
recently. And I used to get a lot of judgment for being a mild Taylor Swift fan, not even to the obsession that I'm currently at. And it all came down to, well, Taylor's not enough when it comes to using her platform to make societal change. Well, and I almost sent it to all of the haters. I saw this video of her arguing with her male record executives because she had a line in the song that was like, fuck the patriarchy. It was literally like, I dropped my keychain that says, fuck the patriarchy on it. And they were like, you can't, you'll lose. So we're all just losing our jobs. And she's sobbing. And she's like, for years, you've told me that I'm not allowed to talk out against Trump, or I'm not allowed to tell people how I'm voting, or I'm not allowed to do this. I'm not allowed to do that. I'm just like supposed to stand on stage and sing my songs. And she goes, and I'm tired of it because every day that I allowed myself to be that person, they took away more people's rights right in front of me. And she's come a hell of a long way when it comes to her activism and what she speaks out on. But I go back to that nuance thing where it's like, it was really easy to be like, oh, little rich Taylor Swift doesn't do enough for us. But then she also had her own obstacles for to do what we would have considered enough. And it's never enough at the end of the day. That's also how they keep us feeling like we're shackled to our own circumstances. They keep reiterating that no matter what, it's never going to be enough. All of this will still exist with or without you. But it's one of those things where Taylor Swift, myself, yourself, those days when we're on it and we are singing a song that says fuck the patriarchy, or we're recording a moment of our shows, we're part of the movement in the moment. And maybe we deserve credit. And maybe we're doing it because fuck your credit. We're doing it so our souls feel better.
that's right. Well, it's not dissimilar to what women have felt forever of like a be sexy but not too sexy, or be maternal but not too maternal. And we want you to be athletic but not better than a man, and like we want you to be smart but not smarter than a man. Like it's just you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And I really think that it is about us listening to our own internal compass, about using our voice when it is safe, and also recognizing that your impact that you create in the world, or how you choose to be an activist, gets to be your call, right? Like if it is through your music, great. If it's through marching, if it's through donations, whatever. I think we all get to have our own perspective around what activism works for us. But here's what I will say: I think by and large, the most impact that we can create are the difficult conversations with our inner circle who feels differently than us. That's courage, because I'll tell you what, getting on a show like this and going off with somebody who feels very similarly to me is a shit ton different than sitting next to somebody at Thanksgiving dinner and when I don't even believe in Thanksgiving anymore. And like, how do I have that conversation with somebody? Those are the conversations that needs to happen. We don't need to be screaming and yelling at celebrities to be, using their platform more. If they can, great. But what conversations have you had with your parents or your aunt and uncle or the kid's parents uh, that your kid plays with, right? Like those are the conversations that are going to move the needle, not us screaming and yelling or doing a post on Instagram.
Because we truly have the most control over the people who are either in our lives or on their way out of our lives and what we impact on them. So a conversation that I think of is like someone made a joke about women not leaving their husbands because, like, well, what if he has money? And then another friend of mine was like, I hope you know that that's one of the number one ways that men abuse women and keep them in bad marriages is through financial abuse. And then I went, yeah, I've seen it in my family. And then that person learned something that day, that it's not just like we're money hungry or we don't know how to feed ourselves or whatever. Sometimes it's literally we've been conditioned to feel like your money's safer than our money.
Right.
And
Right.
you have more of it. Just like just biologically, you get more money. So
Yes.
even number wise, it seems safer to us.
Yeah, it is it's one of those things that I have to toe the line between righteous anger, righteous rage, really, uh, and historical rage, right? Feeling the generations of women who have gone through this stuff and feeling that so potently and not letting it rule my life. And that's a really fine line because it is everywhere. It is around it's every time I walk to the car and have to have my pepper spray, right? It's knowing that my husband will make more money than I would in the same situation. Or that if we go in to buy a car, that people are going to respect him more than they're going to respect me. It is fucking everywhere. But we also have to toe the line with how much we sink into that victimhood because it is real. It is not in your head. You aren't being shrill or naggy it's real. And it's not going to fucking take us down, right? So the more we focus on the power as opposed to the problem, the faster we're going to get to our own enoughness and be able to actually speak up for ourselves.
There it is. There it is. And I love I love to just walk through my day in righteous anger because, anger gives you adrenaline and sometimes I'm tired. Uh,
Yes.
but
Oh my God,
I
put that in one of your comedy bits.
just, anger gives you adrenaline and sometimes I'm tired.
Yes.
Um, but I have found that sometimes you knock people way over. I've knocked people way over and kind of on accident instead of screaming just by stating something like it's a fact. Like, well, no, actually, this is what's happening. And then it's a declarative sentence and they're just looking at me and I go, yeah, women get abused financially by by their husbands. Have you heard of it? And they're like, And I'm like, yeah, no, because you've never. And I think that's where some of it comes into. It's like, you've never had to consider why women would stay in a marriage because of money. You've never had to. And good on you. But I have
Mhm.
because I've had to watch it firsthand and understand that that's what's going on.
I oftentimes I just come back to this as a statement of or sort of a method to live by is if there is a grouping of people, a body of people who I have some sort of similar identity, and they tell me that they've been experiencing pain in a way that I've never felt or never seen because I don't have the same identity. I just fucking believe them. Instead of trying to talk someone out of their pain, or get mad at what that means about me, I just go, hey, babe, I see your pain. I'm so fucking sorry. It doesn't cost me a damn thing to just believe people's pain. We don't have to talk them out of it.
My sister has a great metaphor and she'll use it for like anything: joy, fear, pain, bad days, whatever. It's not a pizza. Like if one person is like, I'm in pain today, that doesn't mean that there's like two slices of pain pizza left for you to eat that day.
That's right. Yeah.
And and it's a very like icky capitalistic way to think about our feelings where it's like, well, only 8 people get to feel joy today. So I guess I'm gonna knock you out so I make sure that I'm one of those 8.
But I mean, think about how much that mentality that and it is absolutely capitalism that shapes how competitive we are and our comparison to one another. And I think there is also a biological primitive reason why we compare. We're always comparing situations to examine threat. Again, coming back to that whole fear response thing of like, am I going to need to take care of myself in some way? So, of course, we're going to do that. But we're also looking at those things through a lens of scarcity of like, there's only one who can reach the top, or I need to knock people out. So I've started using the term equitable envy for when I am envious of somebody because the dictionary definition of envy is that you want you to have it, you don't want them to have it. no matter what it is. So I want what you have and I don't want you to have it. I like the idea of equitable envy being like, I want what you have, but I also want you to have it too.
Yeah. Yes. I want us all to be able to go to the Eras tour. At the end of the day, fuck you, Ticketmaster. We all should have gotten to go.
Yes.
Yes, we all should have gotten to go. Uh, we're coming up to about an hour, so I'm going to go ahead and transition us into our closing ceremony, if you will. That makes it sound like the Hunger Games.
I volunteer as tribute.
Right. But on to all the men I've tolerated before. We have two traditions. We end every episode with our like big takeaway. In this
Mm,
case, it would be about our fear responses. And then we move forward with all of the like tough stuff that we've collected from this episode, and we choose to walk forward in positivity, and we release a manifestation into the universe that we hope happens for the
mm.
people who are also living with fear responses and living in a world where they'll convince you that TikTok is the scariest thing on the planet, so you don't notice that they're going to start controlling what your internet browsers go to. Right.
Right.
It's a ploy. It's always
Yes.
a ploy. They don't care about TikTok. China's had our stuff for ages.
Right. It's a total Wizard of Oz. Like, don't
Yeah.
pay no
No.
attention. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Right. Elon Musk is going to decide what you get to Google today. But what is if you could just say a sentence a day to 20 people, this is the sentence that you would want them to learn.
I would say, well, I have so many of them, and then I'm going like, well, which one actually relates best to fear? So I think it would actually be a question of when you find yourself in a fear response, no matter what that is, whether it's really an intense, like, oh my God, I'm scared, or it's anxiety, or you find yourself people pleasing, is to ask yourself, am I actually in danger, or is this just new? And use that as sort of the even a journal prompt to start excavating behind what you're feeling so that you can get into a little bit of action.
Yeah, I love that because it goes into partnership with what mine was going to be or is going to be. And it's learn to love your instinct again. There's so
Mm,
much that has made us be like, oh, my instinct is bad. That stove wasn't that hot. I'm being dramatic.
yes,
So
I
just
love
like
it.
learn to love your have a newfound like sexy relationship with your instinct. How
Mhm.
many times have you been in an encounter where your entire body has been like, we don't like this person, and you're like, oh, maybe we do though. Like,
Right. I call that the cognitive override. It's where like we get so into the logic and the reason and the rationale instead of the gut. We
mm-hmm.
don't follow our intuition. We breed it out of ourselves. And I could not agree with you more. And I mean, think about even intuitive eating.
Yeah,
Intuitive eating is like this whoa, mind blowing thing because we've been taught to ignore instinct, to ignore our intuition, so much so that it's mind blowing to relearn it. And that's the case with all of this stuff that we're talking about is listening to our anger, listening to our guilt, listening to our fear and analyzing it and looking for the messages behind it.
after I stopped teaching and I got to be in a place where I could like pee whenever I wanted, I had to like relearn like, well, do I have to like not do I have to pee right now, but like is it reasonable for me to get up and pee right now? Because
Yes.
teachers are constantly told you don't get to pee. Like you don't get to
Right.
do that.
What and that is such a metaphor for so many other situations in our culture, right?
Hmm.
Where it's like we eat at a certain time and we you don't hurt this person's feelings even though it is a massive red flag central. No, we need to start reevaluating that. I love that as a takeaway, Nat. So good.
I I used to have so much fear wrapped around like when do I get to eat because of how much we schedule eating, and then I'm convinced that like, well, if you don't eat between noon and 2, then your body is just going to be out of whack for the rest of the day or whatever. And antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds have kind of curbed that a little bit. what a thing. And I
Right?
remember the first
Science.
science. I remember the first day where I like looked at a friend and I was like, I haven't thought about lunch. And they were like, okay. And I was like, no, I only think about lunch. Like, I'm always anxious about whether or not lunch is going to happen because I know how much I hate feeling sluggish at
Yeah.
3 o'clock. Like, I
Right.
hate it. What would be your manifestation that you would like to offer to our listeners and the collective as a whole?
Ooh. I would love a great manifestation for everybody to try on this as just a manifestation mantra of I am capable of speaking my truth with grace and kindness. I am capable of speaking my truth. And the reason why I think capable is important, instead of just saying, I speak my truth, is it's a reminder that we have an innate ability. And it's really similar to what you were talking about with our instinct. Like we already have a compass, we have an internal knowing, we have our intuition, and it's about getting back in contact with that and trusting it, right?
Hmm.
So that would be my manifestation for you. I am capable of speaking my truth with grace and kindness.
And I think I'm going to go just because it's been such a big thing. And I love that you brought it up. I hope we start giving one another grace when it comes to the nuance again, because I
Yes.
think that we've completely wiped that out of our vernacular, like just knowing that there is nuance and that I can have grace when experiencing someone who is experiencing something differently than me. Um, and I feel like it is very purposeful that so that there are a lot of loud people who have broken down nuance and are like, nope, it's right or wrong. So you got to pick
Mm-mm.
left or right. Come on.
Nope.
We live in a world of gray, and I think we should celebrate that more.
Right. And I think probably both you and I can get lost in that black and white thinking. I
Hmm.
know we have a lot of similarities just in wanting to control things and things. And so one of my little tools that I give to people is instead of gray, because obviously I love a lot of color and decoration and adornment. So I go, what's the pink option? What's the chartreuse option? What is the like baby aqua color that I have not looked at because I'm so locked into the black and white. It has to be let's get some fucking color in there. Let's get some
That's
zebra
right.
print.
What's the purple of it all?
That's right. A nice maroon.
And oh, I love a maroon. Uh,
Eggplant.
Amy, you are fantastic. I hope that every person that you come into contact with makes sure to tell you that you are so insightful and you bring so much to everyone who talks to you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I was just thinking the same thing. Oh, I love your takeaways. I love your manifestation and such a great encapsulation of the things that we've talked about. So
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to hang out with you, and you are brilliant in your own right, and I'm grateful.
Well, thank you so much. Make sure to tell the tolerators and the listeners where they can find you.
Sure. So my little corner of the internet is amygreensmith.com, and all of those names are spelled the very basic bitch way. Amy, AMY, Green without an E, and Smith, like everyone else. And so that's where you can find me. That's sort of my hub. I have tons of freebies over there, some free hypnosis, some free workbooks. I've done almost 500 episodes of my podcast for the last 10 years. So tons of freebies over there. And then, like any, self respecting Gen Xer, I hang out the most on Instagram. So you can find me over at Hey Amy Green Smith, and that's my handle pretty much everywhere on social. But yeah, come over to the site and get a bunch of freebies and come hang out.
Go because Amy is like a style icon. I
Oh,
didn't tell you all that, but every time she logs on to talk about something work related, I'm like, your glasses look like a monarch butterfly, though. And I would like to voice that.
thank you. I'll take it. I'll take it.
um, and tolerators, you know the deal because I put a handy little commercial reminding you of all of our socials and the Patreon and all the ways to get at me with all of your needs. So thanks for being here. Thank you once more, Amy, for being our lovely guest. And remember, tolerators, you don't have to smile through anything you're tolerating, including a world that will hand you a fear while they instead secretly uplift a different thing that you should be afraid of. Smiles are for joy.